Don't worship the symbols of God's greatness. Today we're going to talk about Gideon. You'll find him in chapters 6, 7, and 8 in Judges. And just a little bit of preview here leading up to the point and the lesson today of which we're going to talk about. Gideon was a farmer, and 7 years before he became a judge, the Israelites, of course, you know they went through cycle after cycle of obedience and disobedience, and they were judged. God used the Midianites to do that. People camped down in the valley, and every time that harvest came, when things were plentiful for the Israelites, they would attack, ransack, and take things from the Israelites. And this was going on for 7 years. And so Gideon, average guy, farmer, the angel comes and says, mighty man of God, or mighty warrior, mighty man of valor. And Gideon, through a series of developments, became a judge. Of course, he tested God a few times with that fleece. He asked for confirmations, you can read it in 6, 7, that he did that. And the point of the story here is that we have Gideon, a judge. You know that he used 300, God used 300 men. They didn't even have any swords. What they had, lamps, they had jugs, and they were three things, but they were not war swords or arrows or anything like that. And so these guys had great victories. These men of God had great victories, and God showed and delivered them. So that's the background of this story. The thing that I want to get to today is this story has a sad ending. Great man of God. He got it. He walked in the Lord's strength. And what happened was, after a series of victories, the Israelites came to Gideon and said, why don't you be our king, your son be our king, and your grandson be our king? They wanted a lineage here of kings. And Gideon, boy, up to that point, right at that point, he spoke wisely and he said, no way, I am not going to do this, because he knew that would not go well. But then you have the next verse later. It's always that next verse later. Remember David, victory with the Edomites? The next couple chapters or verses later, Bathsheba. And so what happens here with Gideon is, he says, give me the earrings, the golden earrings from the Ishmaelites that we have conquered in the latest victory. And they spread a garment out. And here I will read in Judges 7:22 what happened. And I will get to the point that Gideon makes an ephod. This is a robe. This is a divinely prescribed robe that the priests wear, an apron. Okay, let me read this, and then we'll take it from there. This is chapter 7, verse 27. Then Gideon made it into an ephod and set it up in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. So what do we have here? What's the main point of all of this today? Why would I have this title, Don't Worship the Symbols of God's Great Victories, or the symbols of God's victories? Well, we learn here that Gideon made a serious mistake, and it had serious consequences. And so what we have to watch out for here, what we learn from Gideon, is that when we have victories, when we have great things that God does for us, and either we make something or something comes to us through these victories, that we do not set them up to worship. And right after a victory, we learn, we see, and we've seen this over and over in the Bible, that we are vulnerable for temptation. We are vulnerable. Here's a great victory and then a temptation. Right here, Gideon failed the test. He did not remain the purity of the very things that he did. Remember, this is a guy that tore down the Baals. He tore down the things that the Israelites worshipped that were ungodly, but he did it at night. So, he tried, but that was the way he did it, okay? But this is a guy here, still a great man. A great man. We learn some things. The second thing we learn is that we should not act without seeking God's direction, God's advice. He just made this ephod, and we are supposed to, the third thing we learn is to keep our faith and our focus on God, not on the symbols of God's greatness. The symbol of God's greatness here is this ephod, and this ephod, they worshipped it. Do you have any ephods in your life? Now, you might say, that's kind of silly, Steve. An ephod, a priestly garment that I'm worshiping, it doesn't have to take the shape of an ephod. Your ephod may be your bank account. It may be the house that you're sitting in right now, comfortably so, watching this video. It may be your bank account. Like I said, it may be anything that you have set up that you are so happy, maybe that you have it, but something happens. Something crosses over where you begin to worship it, and it becomes an idol or a snare. That's what I'm talking about, brothers and sisters. I'm just talking about sensitizing you to the fact that we have, if we're not careful, right after a victory, we will erect symbols of God's greatness and then worship them. And you might think that's silly, but if you look in your life, when there was something great and followed by a fall, which if you trace it, it's similar to Gideon, then wow, it makes sense. Oh, I just pray that you as well as me will be aware of these things so that we do not set that ephod up and let it be a snare. You can read the rest of the story. Gideon is a judge for 40 years with Israel. No problems, peace. But after that, through the snare, and they return to the Baal worship and all that he has 70 sons, a lot of wives, and one by a slave girl kills the 70. One escapes, but pain, problems, and that is my point. My point is, brothers and sisters, guard against not worshiping the next ephod that you might construct. If you have any now, watch out for that and deal with it when you have a great victory. God bless you today, in Jesus' mighty name.